Over the last few weeks, phrases such as self-isolating and social distancing have been used as a means of trying to stop the spread of coronavirus or COVID-19. And I, for one, would encourage everybody to follow the government's advice. But the situation we find ourselves in is almost unprecedented. Yes, we've had other things such as swine flu and foot and mouth. And as devastating as these might have been, what we are now facing seems to be worse, probably because of its widespread nature and the fact that everybody is susceptible to contracting this disease simply by going about our daily routines of work and home life. And because of the advice to avoid contact with other people, either because you might unknowingly be a carrier and pass it on, or someone pass it on to you. Today, Mothering Sunday seems to take on a different pattern and meaning. For many, gone will be the family gatherings, with each generation getting together to exchange cards and gifts. And in its place, perhaps there comes a telephone call, something like FaceTime or some other technological answer to this present day problem. And yet, I would like to think, as the saying goes, that absence really does make the heart grow fonder. For so often we only miss something or someone when it or they are not there. Mothering Sunday is a special day set aside not only to remember our own mothers, but all mothers. But we recognize what they have done for us, perhaps even the sacrifices they have made. We think about the time they have spent with us, nurturing and guiding us, loving and no doubt challenging our behavior and the things we say. And yet we also remember those whose experience of both their own mother or even motherhood itself is not as how they would have wished or hoped for. We think of children who have been abused or neglected, women who want nothing more than to hear the first cries of a newborn baby, those who, for a variety of different reasons, must kiss goodbye to their parents or children as someone else takes on the joy, the privilege, and the responsibility of parenting. And of course, we remember those mothers who have lost their children through illness, tragic accident, or increasingly at the hands of others. And because of this, Mothering Sunday, in the middle of this viral pandemic, seems to take on added significance and meaning. For all people want to do is to gather, to celebrate, to give thanks, and to be in each other's company. But the plea to self-isolate and exercise social distancing has put a damper on this for many. And that is why, in the midst of all this uncertainty, I am holding on to the idea that absence really does make the heart grow fonder. Social distancing and self-isolation may be scary to some people, but having been through something approaching this myself in the last month or so, I can say from experience that it does pass. But it is a challenge. And yet knowing that there will be an end is of great comfort. And even in the darkest of moments where there seems to be little or no light at the end of the tunnel, there is someone for whom social distancing and self-isolation is anything but a reality. For he wants nothing more than to reach out and touch each and every one of us. And in our reading from John's Gospel, we find only one example of this. For here we read how Jesus was walking along with his disciples when he comes across a blind beggar and is challenged to answer the question of whose sin is this man carrying, the sin that has made him blind. And yet, in true Jesus style, he stops and answers this question, not by way of simply answering, but by one that poses even more questions. His blindness, Jesus says, has nothing to do with his sins or the sins of his parents. He is blind so that God's power might be seen at work in him. As long as it is day, we must keep on doing the work of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, Jesus says, I am the light of the world. And then he does something truly, truly remarkable. He spits on the ground and makes the soil into mud and rubs it into the man's eyes with the instruction for him to go and wash his face in the pool of Siloam. And on doing this, the man is healed. Little is known about this blind man in question. We don't even know his name. All that we know is what the gospel writer shares. The fact that he was blind and that he was a regular at this very same spot, begging for scraps that passers-by would give him. And in many ways, like many of us today, he was exercising self-isolation and social distancing, not because of his lack of sight, but because he was forced to throw himself at the mercy of others, living off anything they could give him. And yet Jesus broke through those barriers of isolation and distancing, not only by responding to need, but by sharing something of himself in the process. And this was not the first, nor would it be the last time that he did this. For his love for others compels him to act. His sense of purpose and ministry made him stop and approach the vulnerable and the needy. He took pity and he embraced not only this unnamed beggar, but the whole of the community, the neighbours that the man would have known, and the wider community of faith that heard and continued to hear the gospel message. We know this desire to break in through people's isolation and fears is a continuing thing. For time and time again, we see how the love of God breaks into people's lives, how it calms their fears, how it comforts their hearts, and how it brings meaning to their minds. But God does not walk on by, but stops and offers something of himself to all those in need. And in our passage, Jesus goes further still, reminding us that he is the light of the world and that his light is temporary. But while he is in the world, he will show the love of God to all those he meets. To me, this recounting of Jesus' words, where he refers to himself as being the light of the world, is both interesting and highly significant. Remember how we are told in Genesis, in the creation stories, that the world was in chaos. Chaos until there was light. And from that moment, how the world then took on form and meaning. And then in the opening few verses of John's Gospel, we hear Jesus saying that the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness have never put it out. And when we reflect on both passages, we see that the physical light and the spiritual light merge together to create a whole new world. A new world of light and meaning, of reaching out and touching not only those in need, but everybody. As things stand at present, our churches have been asked to cease all regular activities and services until Easter. And this decision was reached after a great deal of prayer and thought. And I would even go as far as saying that it was one of the most difficult yet easy decisions that I have been involved with my time on our parental board. As it stands, Easter seems to be the most appropriate time to start to meet again. Although we must continue to heed government advice and discern what God is saying. But there is something special about this most meaningful of Christian seasons. For as the sun rises on a new Easter day, not only do we once again declare that the Lord is risen, we do it with real gusto, with faith and with hope. But just like these days that we are currently enduring, with the uncertainties surrounding the self-isolation and social distancing brought on by the coronavirus, and then the creation narratives found in Genesis, we can see parallels between the chaos of creation before the light came. And then we think of the time between Good Friday and Easter Day, and even beyond until the disciples, like the blind beggar from our gospel reading, could see again, and then reflect our own experiences. And again, the parallels are there. For in each example, chaos and uncertainty reign, and yet the light that comes from God, brought and will continue to bring it again, form and meaning, love and hope. And I know that even as we journey through these dark days of uncertainty, the light of Christ continues to shine in our hearts and in our lives. The light of Christ is being seen. We are already finding new ways of sharing fellowship and of being church. And for us in the Moravian Church, this is nothing new. For our history and heritage have seen all this before. And so we can and must take heart, having faith in God and in one another, until the time comes when we can return to our normal and regular church activities and ways of being. For we know through our centuries of experience that light and renewed hope always follow a period of darkness and uncertainty. And God is in the world, just as much as he has ever been. And he is working in and through us to break that non-physical sense of self-isolation and social distancing. So I would encourage you to consider how you can best respond to that call, the call to be the light of Christ, the light that shines in the darkness. Perhaps you can make a telephone call to a friend or neighbor, or even wave at passers-by. We can pray. Of course we can pray, not only for those we know, but for the world around us and even ourselves. Yes, we can be light in so many ways, even in the darkest of places. For this is our call. This is our way, and this is Christ's command. And finally, perhaps in continuing to be the light of Christ, there are two lessons that we can learn. Firstly, that that absence really does make the heart grow fonder. And more importantly, that the light of Christ really does continue to shine in even the darkest of places and days. Amen.